So this is SIC Talks number 108 with Eugene Rabkin of Style Zeitgeist. This is Eugene's second time on the pod, the last time being in 2022 or so, not long after we were introduced via a conversation about the state of fashion at that time, immediately post-pandemic and all of that. Eugene is a longtime contributor to many journalistic outlets, including Highsnobiety, Business of Fashion, and many others. And he and I ran into each other recently at the opening of Stone Island's new Soho store, at which I discovered Eugene had written a book about Stone Island, some of Stone Island's key pieces in its history, which I had not been aware of. So, Eugene, all of that is to say, when I tell people that I'm going to talk to you, they get very excited, but I don't really know how to describe where you sit in the world and what roles you occupy. Could you mind introducing me as well as everybody else?
Hello. Well, yeah, I guess my main job is a fashion critic. That's what I was. Well, I would rephrase it. My main job is a fashion journalist. Uh, I write about other things as well, but mostly I write about fashion. I have my own magazine called Style Zeitgeist, and I have a podcast by the same name. Fashion criticism is what I'm mostly known for, much more than reportage. And that really was not by design. At some point, I just started sharing my opinions on the state of the fashion industry, and that's really taken off. And so that's what people know me for. And uh, the first time you had me on back in the good old days of
I don't know.
Clubhouse,
I mean, yeah, those were good old days.
yeah, we spoke about the state of fashion journalism and fashion criticism in particular, and my oh my, how things have changed since then. So here we are, and yes, I've done a Stone Island book. I've done a couple of other books. I have my own book of on fashion coming out next year. It's a work of cultural criticism, which I am super excited about.
Wow.
I don't want to give away too much, but it's going to be about fashion and postmodernism and the pernicious effect on fashion that postmodern mentality has perpetuated in the past 25 years, really in the past 15 years.
Talk about that a little bit. What do you mean by the pernicious effect that it's had?
Yeah. Some of postmodernist ideas that have had a good beginning, such as destruction of hierarchies, the sort of aesthetic relativism, democratization of taste, this sort of culture of pastiche, of making art as pastiche, retromania, constant cross-referencing of the past, in my opinion, have turned into really kind of a lazy mode of stuckness fashion
Okay, sure.
itself. And now, and that's really sort of in a nutshell of a nutshell.
What would be? I hear you, and I guess the way I describe it from my layman's position relative to the wider fashion business is that reference and reverence has a place and is important, but really what we should be trying to do is constantly move forward. And instead, what we are doing is navel gazing about all of the cool stuff we've done in the past and like recoloring it and reintroducing it. Is that a sort of
Yeah.
summation?
It's a good way to describe it, but also the fact that we have completely broken down the existing semiotic codes, and we haven't substituted new ones. That we continually, revise things, reiterate things, doing something retro, and not only that is that we have been championing this stuff as something that's completely genius. And so this whole marketing layer on top of that, and then of course comes with celebrities, and that the destruction of meaning that have gone on in culture in general, I would say, for the past 25 years, with the rise of poptimism, that really has also transferred into fashion. And the lack of meaning that the fashion industry tries now to paper over with, latching onto culture more and more, trying to create meaning where there really isn't one, in the things themselves that fashion creates. It's a really sort of a enervated, tired, listless industry. And that's what I try to describe in my book and how we got here. And hopefully, in the end, I offer some alternatives.
So not to be a spoiler of the book, then, but just for the audience's benefit, who would you describe as the greatest culprit of this kind of stuckness, and who would you describe as the greatest resistor of it in the present day? Or when was the last moment that we successfully resisted it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really go after some sacred cows in this book. And the with is people who know my work, no surprise there.
Right.
I would say Virgil Abloh is the biggest culprit here.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I think Virgil Abloh is the biggest example of how postmodernist prestige has led to a stuckness and lack of innovation um, in the fashion industry itself. So that's probably be the prime example. Prime example against it, we still have a great few modernists working today. Probably, I would say Ray Kawakubo and Rick Owens would be two examples. People who try to innovate, people who try to genuinely create something new, people who try to actually challenge the audience to bring something unfamiliar and uncomfortable, because these are the things that make us think.
Yeah.
Right. Like the familiar and the comfortable doesn't make us think. Our brains are lazy.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess seeing it from using those two examples, though, it's an interesting line to walk, because you have a Virgil who, yes, known for the idea of the 3% alteration, and then it's um, a new object is as one of his famous contentions. In fact, I heard somebody cite it unprompted yesterday in a conversation I was having. And on the other hand, Ray and Comme des Garçons is its commercial foundation is the CDG play character and the notion of serializing that character and licensing it out. So is it about for you the intention that characterizes the difference, or is it about how it actually like comes to market?
To me, it is the overall aesthetic proposition and the philosophy that's come from it. No question, there is a decent amount of income probably that Comme des Garçons derives from play, but it's not the overwhelming amount. Obviously Rick Owens sells a lot of sneakers to children, but that is not a aesthetic proposition.
Very, very wealthy children. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they're all, and not even wealthy children. A lot of children who like scrunched up savings, cajoled their parents,
That's fair.
because they want that one pair, and it means something to them, and that's fair enough. But their ethos, their philosophy comes from these two modernist precepts. One is make it new, and two, make it difficult. These were the two precepts of high modernism. That was the spirit of innovation, and that is virtually absent today. And this is the destruction of meaning is a whole other thing we can talk about. And I think Virgil is culpable there, because he was there to destroy meaning of what is something new, of what is innovative, of what constitutes fashion. of what means what. The
Yeah.
building of semiotic codes has been a big thing. But I can go on and
Do
on.
you
But
do you excuse? Okay, well, no, no, no. Of course, and not to make you talk your book, Eugene, but I am fascinated by this because I think of stuff like, Virgil. I think we probably both interacted with me, not very much. I don't know how much you did, but in it, the thing that was interesting to me was that he always was curious and was always seemed to be very interested in where things were heading. And so there was a feeling of trying to capture the new. And then I look at some of his bigger commercial successes like the 10 with Nike, and those were, to my mind, if not avant-garde, then at the very least like progressive subversions of Nike's design language and that sort of stuff, which were revolutionary in their ability to both translate that kind of anti-functional design to the masses and also to forward the argument. Do you see it differently, or is that the exception that proves the rule?
I see it differently. I see that Virgil was not a reflection of what's new. He was a reflection of what's current. And those are
Mm.
different things. And what's current is postmodernism. We are completely, deeply, irrevocably in the postmodernist era where image is everything. Objects themselves don't really matter, where it's all about simulacra and simulation world of what that Baudrillard described in 81. And so no, I don't think he was the reflection of what's new. He was a reflection of what's current. And he himself said about those sneakers in the that Harvard address that you guys can find on YouTube. He says, I don't want a new sneaker. I want already what's familiar. I'm just gonna tweak it. And
Okay.
that's not newness to me. To me, it's not. To him, it may have been. Yeah. And one of the arguments I make, as I consistently make, I'm not saying those things don't have a place.
Sure.
They absolutely do have a place. And one of the things that I open my book with is the destruction. What do I mean by destruction of meaning? For example, why is everything called fashion? Why does H&M call itself fashion? Why does Brunello Cucinelli calls itself fashion? Why does Hermes call itself? Like, why can't we call things by their own names? And that's been the perennial. This is how I started my fashion criticism career. Uh, I wrote an article against like H&M and Margiela collab, and all I said is like, can we call things by their own name? Why are we destroying meaning so we can then recreate it in the service of marketing?
Sure. So two questions then. What would you have called, or what would you call H&M? Is that just its commodity clothing?
It's fast fashion. There's no,
That's
it's
okay, but it's so you would distinguish between capital F fashion and fast fashion with
yes,
lower cases. Okay.
yes, and I would distinguish, uh, luxury apparel like Brunello Cucinelli, Laura Piana, and that's not fashion. Cause is not fashion. Fashion is not what we used to call this. When we said fashion before, we used to mean designer fashion. Someone
Sure.
who puts conceptuality, innovation, high level of craft, all of that into one mix and puts it on the runway. Yesterday, I read an article that said Sunspell is a luxury brand opening, and I said, here's a novel idea for marketing. We make nice clothes. How about that?
Yeah.
It
Well,
doesn't mean that there is no place for that. Of course, there's a place for that. There's a place for everything. There's a place for Brunello Cucinelli. There's a place for Virgil Abloh. Let's just call things by their own name.
right. Sure. Well, and or let's emphasize what is actually really the heart of the appeal with a brand like Sunspell, which I think has been around for on the order of 100 years or something like that. It's not a new brand. You emphasize the bona fides rather than the unsubstantiated aspirations. Um, Okay, well, all of that being said, the point of these conversations, generally speaking, is to act as a companion to my newsletter, SIC, which comes out on Wednesdays, and which I shared a pre-read of for you. One of the articles that you picked out as being interesting dovetails nicely with this idea of the postmodern moment that we're in, and your book as a marker of, or a definition of that moment, because it is an article that proposes the successor to postmodernism, prediction.
Yeah. Yes.
So this was written by Alex Danco, was a longtime Shopify bigwig and is now the in-house blogger at Andreessen Horowitz. And it follows on the idea that the reason that young audiences, young people in particular, are so drawn to prediction markets like Kalshi Poly Market, even FanDuel, the sports betting, that sort of stuff, is because there is a way of not simply taking the present or the recent past and ripping it apart and breaking it down for its parts and reassembling it, but rather building a new future out of predictions of what will happen in the future. I thought the argument was a little strained, to be honest, but I was really fascinated by this notion of like what comes after postmodernism. You've probably thought a lot about that.
I've thought a bit about that, and the answer is we don't know. And that is the answer I always give when people ask.
Yeah, of course.
The answer is we don't know. I tell you what I think we do know, and what you said about the author, where he is now, is very, very telling.
Of course.
And he is now at a firm that invests in companies that claim that they are making the future, right? They're the ones who are building the future. So they're kind of involved in self-fulfilling prophecies, I would say. Whether those self-fulfilling prophecies will come to pass is we don't know, and we don't know what will come after postmodernism. Well, we don't. Some people would say there's no such thing as postmodernism, right? We're just in some kind of linear progression. Prediction markets are, I think, comforting. We are meaning making creatures. We're meaning seeking creatures, and we always are there to sort of to minimize risk of the uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so that's predictions market were kind of like that. It's kind of like trend forecasting in fashion, right? It's completely made up. It's completely made up stuff. Like nobody, they are self-fulfilling prophecies, right? It's a bunch of people who got together and they said, this is going to be the trend. Well, how does the trend happen? They all read the same trend marketing reports and they manifest that change collectively,
Right.
distribute it to the fashion media, and they hope that the change will take off. That's how I see it. Who really knows what's going to happen? Generational change is absolutely fascinating. And I feel like we don't talk about it enough in fashion, for example. But I don't know these prediction markets. It's a comfortable thought for late capitalism, right? Because the way capitalism works,
Yeah, of course.
periodically it needs to create new technologies. I use technologies very, very loosely.
Yeah, sure.
So there is a massive transfer of capital into these technologies that spurs the economy and that spurs the stock market. And that's why capitalism is, I mean, Marx spoke about this in 1850, right? That's why capitalism will inevitably has to go through these boom and bust cycles. And we are in one right now, AI, right? This is,
Yeah, for sure.
no one knows whether it will actually work the way the boosters are saying it will work. No one knows if it will generate the revenues, right? that they predicted will generate, will it be life-changing? Probably not. Will it be somewhat
Yeah.
helpful? Most definitely.
That's
We
so.
already went through that, right? Recently, metaverse, NFC. I'm sure your audience remembers that as well.
Don't no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. That was one of those. That was one of those moments of artificially creating something and hoping that the entire economy moves that way. For God's sake, Mark Zuckerberg renamed his entire company to Meta, which I'm sure he's like face bombing himself every day. Should have renamed it to AI. Uh,
Well, yeah, you're right. I think he probably doesn't regret the Meta rename. He probably does regret not being more prescient about what it is. Although I do think meta as a word and a title for them is not bad, because it speaks to the fact that they are effectively just reflecting on what the rest of the market is doing and then, copying it anyway. So
right.
yeah, the I guess what I wanted to ask while you were just going through that is where you find yourself on the spectrum of AI bull to AI bear. I say to people all the time that I'm very bearish, and not because I don't think AI is going to be very valuable, but to me, it's like it will act like electricity in that it becomes a force that powers and amplifies lots of efficiencies across many touch points in our lives. But I just don't. I have a hard time seeing it be the sort of thing that, you know, full replacement of value
Yeah.
across a lot of sectors.
Yeah, I would say probably like 75% bearish,
Okay.
25% bullish. No question, it will change certain industries. My brother is a software developer, and he is already being using the tools, and it blows his mind the way it writes software. So he thinks, what will happen is you will need one software developer instead of 10 who will just prompt AI to write software, and the rest of the people will be in QA, right? Quality assurance for the.
Sure.
I spent too many years on Wall Street, um, in my other life, and so some industries will change and quite radically, but I think most industries will stay the same. I think, or not change as radically as people think. Journalists will continue writing. Maybe their grammar will be checked by AI. And
or maybe not, because the typos become proof of actual human life, right? Where
yeah, exactly. We already start seeing that boosterism of AI now requires significant investment. You saw that Nvidia invested 100 billion into OpenAI, so OpenAI can continue buying chips from Nvidia. So you start already seeing this propping up. But as long as it props up the stock market, and it's doing that very well, right? This will continue to happen, because at the end of the day, that's where they derive their wealth.
right. It's the thing that we always look at or what I always encourage people to do is look at where the incentives in these structures are, because whether or not something makes sense is secondary to whether or not someone's incentivized to make it happen, like personally, professionally,
Yeah.
monetarily, whatever the case is. To that end, it's interesting, like you're in the face of AI, writing a book is kind of a retrograde protest against
Yeah. Well,
what is possible, right?
yeah.
Does that cross your mind at all, or do you just sit there and go, I got to get this out because it's just like I need a vessel for my thoughts to mark the moment?
Oh no, I mean, I have no doubt that AI will not replace human writing. It's just like AI only operates on what is on the inputs of the past, right? What
Yeah.
the human mind is the future. So I feel totally safe there. I'm super resistant to AI. It's just a force of habit. My wife was like, "Why don't you just use it for grammar?" And I'm like, "No, I own my
Yeah.
mistakes. I'm a human being." Uh, and at the end of the day, I have copy editors at the publishers, so I don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
No, but I didn't think about, like, when I was approached by a publisher to write my book. And by the way, my publisher is Zero Books in London, Mark Fisher's publisher. For those of you who don't know, Mark Fisher wrote this book, Capitalist Realism, which all of you should read. Uh,
Good. I'm not familiar, so I'm going to add it to my reading list.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a brilliant, brilliant book, and so he started this publishing house on the strength of it, and I am very proud. I was really flattered when they approached me.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you, and they're like, "We've never done a book about fashion. We think you're the person." And I had this book in my mind. I was like, I know exactly what I'm saying. I've been thinking about postmodernism and culture in general, fashion in particular, for like 15 years now, and sort of seeing it unfold in real time.
Was there a okay, so that's an interesting. Was there a moment of inception for you where, I don't know what, you walk into a store and you're confronted with a display, or you go to a show and you see a thing, or somebody at dinner makes an offhand comment that sort of set you off on that path? I'm always interested in where those little moments of catharsis are, that or catalyzation.
Yeah. Yeah, I was probably seeing, it was like fourth collection of Vetements, when
Okay,
Demna was still involved. And listen, Vetements started already as pastiche, right? They were just
of
simply
course.
reworking what Martin Margiela was doing, but it seemed fresh enough because it was the right moment for it. There was that feeling of stuckness. But we saw how quickly, and we argued about them in our last
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
conversation. But I saw how quickly it deteriorated into just like, we're gonna make oversized hoodies with ironic graphics on them, and everyone's gonna say what geniuses we are. Yeah. And that's the big thing for me. We already talked about it. Like, just call it what it is.
Right.
Like, but if you're telling me that Jeff Koons is a genius, I'm gonna argue with you. If you're gonna tell me that Jeff Koons reflects exactly where culture is at, I will be in complete agreement with you.
Sure.
Yes. If you tell me he's a great artist, you're probably gonna get an argument from me.
Who that's interesting. Okay, so a couple of thoughts. One is, what is, now that Demna has moved into his Gucci phase, does that provoke any sort of reassessment, or do you sort of reset the clock for him in any way?
No, I don't reset the clock for him because I think he knows only how to do one thing. He has his signature. Uh, this is not a criticism again. That is his signature. It's
Sure.
okay. There are others, designers who have their own signatures. I just don't find his signature interesting. I think it's pure postmodernism. This irony is a big thing in postmodernism. Yet another thing that started out well and ended up in a dead end, is irony. It's a very postmodern thing, very Gen X thing, as you and I very well know.
Yeah, for sure.
And our irony is ultimately is a dead end, and his kind of sardonic irony seems particularly powerless, and sort of enervated and stuck. And he's gonna do at Gucci what he did at Balenciaga because that's the only thing he knows how to do. But it's gonna be a different logo, and I predict it will be a failure.
Interesting. I would take the other side of that bet, because I think the market wants familiar plus. and he is delivering that already.
Mm.
Like it's the collection that dropped. So I went and saw saw it at the Worcester store on a couple of occasions. It feels like enough of a tweak to move away from the Gucci of the past, but um also familiar enough that it doesn't make it hard to buy. He's played with the price points to make it more accessible, which I think is really smart, and somebody needs credit for that. And I thought the Tiger was a really smart tool,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the tools drive the trade.
Yeah.
In a lot of respects.
Yeah. Well, we'll check in 12 months, and we'll
Okay.
see. We'll see where we are. We'll see where we are. I think it's going to be very hard to do what he did for $1 billion brand for a $10 billion.
Sure.
Well, I mean, they
Sure.
want it to be a $10 billion brand. So we'll see. I think there are just systemic changes that no creative designer can address.
Okay, talk about that a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Well, sounds like they're already addressing. So actually, on my Substack, on the Style Zeitgeist Substack, not on my personal one, I have to. Jesus.
Prodigious creator over here.
Yeah. Well, at some point, I wanted to write things about other than fashion, and I was like, I'm tired of pitching these articles. I'm just gonna put them on Substack. So, but what I wrote Monday, sorry, when it came out, is that if these CEOs were smart of these big fashion brands, they would use this moment of the musical chairs of creative directors to lower prices, because now they have a perfect excuse. You can't just lower prices in the luxury industries, right? We're not selling refrigerators. So you lower prices, you tarnish the image of luxury, right? And perception of exclusivity. So you need an alibi. I think changing of a creative director is a perfect alibi.
Of course.
Now that you say, here's the new creative director, that means a new assortment. And that's your alibi for lowering prices, at least on the new assortment. Sounds like, according to you, that's what they're doing, because I haven't seen the new stuff.
They talked about one of the things that was hotly tipped coming out of Paris was this new Jackie bag. So the Jackie is a stalwart silhouette for Gucci, named for Jackie Kennedy. What the associate told us at the store in Soho when I was there was that the old ones on the other side, the Worcester Street side of the store, were started at $4,000, and the new ones started at $2,700.
There you go. That's your fix.
Right, because to me, the $4,000 is way too much for that bag, and 27 gets it into the zone of like, okay, I could imagine, particularly if this is a bag that everyone wants or whatever, it theoretically appreciates, whatever the case is. Like, it's much more copacetic with where the market ought to be there. So yeah.
Smart. I want credit and a consultant gig. Thank you. Because I've been lobbying for this since, I wrote in 2020 for Business of Fashion, like during COVID, when everyone was reassessing everything, including the fashion industry. Should we do this? Should we do that? The deliveries are too early. The sales are too early. It's all messed up. And I wrote an op-ed. I was like, well, you can just lower prices. How about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's sometimes Occam's razor or the Occam's razor theory, right? Like the most obvious solution is the correct one. The one thing, by the way, I speaking of our prediction market as the future of, or the successor to postmodernism, I looked to see if there is a current Kalshi bet about whether Demna will succeed at Gucci, and there apparently is not, according to this new AI powered Comet browser I'm using, which Perplexity put out. So you and I can get in on the Kalshi market. We can create a marketplace and we can do it. What that makes me wonder, though, Eugene, is especially as someone who came from Wall Street, like where do you find signal from noise? Where do you find your information? Because that's so much about what like my newsletter is. Meant to be.
Which is incredible and incredibly overwhelming. Every time I read it, I'm like, man, I don't have enough hours in the day. Like, how does Ben do it? In deep respect for that. I am so cautious about consuming information because there is so much noise, and I feel like my time is so incredibly precious, like between the work and the leisure time that I want to have and the time for intellectual stimulation that I want to have. Is just it's so hard to find that balance. Signal from noise, good question. I've really cut down on my media consumption.
Mm.
And I think much of it came, and we can talk about it, about two other articles that I suggested that's kind of segueing, and it so much journalism now seems like opinion as opposed to reportage. You may laugh, but I've kind of cut down regularly. What I read is The Economist religiously,
Okay.
like statistics driven journalism, please. Thank you very much. The Wall Street Journal, obviously not the opinion section,
Sure.
just the reportage. And they've been really, really, I mean, they're kind of eating New York Times as lunch, as far as I'm concerned.
Interesting.
Uh,
Okay.
and, and I have like a Financial Times edit because I can't afford the full subscription. But there is this Financial Times app that's just an edit. They give you 8 to 10 articles a day, and it's like $1 a week or something.
Sure.
So that's my regular diet, and then the rest is like whatever strays come at me. And obviously, this is general publications. Then obviously, Business of Fashion is what I read daily, and the Fashion Network is the other one. And that's really about it. A couple of Substacks. There's a new one that I love, Intern Pierre, and that's again a guy who he worked for a hedge fund. I think he's independently wealthy. He runs his own family office, and he just started looking at the luxury sector and consumers, and he has, and I know this because I worked in market data in my other life. I would be like, why are we paying some guy 5,000 a month for like an email that comes in once a week about weather futures? And they would be like, yeah, because he's sitting in Washington amongst all the lobbies. That's the guy you want to pay 5,000 a month.
Yeah. 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 For sure.
Yeah. So he has access to that information, which is like quite privileged, and he kind of transferred it to his Substack. And this is all I want to read. I don't want to read any mainstream media BS. I don't want to read all it. I'm like, I want to read what I consider privileged information that is statistically driven, where I can then process it, see what I'm observing myself, make up my own mind, and then
Sure.
for that to my audience.
So no. But there's nothing you would qualify as privileged information, or in like within the deep bowels of Reddit or the the fashion
Yeah.
the secret fashion Discord or something like that.
I'm sure there is something out there, but just the signal to noise ratio
Sure.
is not big enough for me to take a deep dive. I just don't have the time. I just like I am one guy, and so I've really. I mean, look, we all operate on incomplete information, right? So it's
Yeah.
a matter of like how much you can do it. So that's my media diet. That's what yeah, and I'm sure there's some good stuff on Substack out there that I'm not catching, but c'est la vie,
Yeah, 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 of course. Well, I mean, that's exactly it. I think part of the benefit of age is that you can sort of come gracefully to the notion that you can't know everything, and that to try is just a
Yeah,
futile is a pointless exercise.
yeah. But also, like, I know you also an avid reader of books. Like, I read a lot of books, and the information you get from these books, in nonfiction and fiction, is incredible. And at some point, I thought, okay, if you're the guy, not you personally, but a guy who is on social media 24/7, and shares that information, and I'm the guy who read Jean Baudrillard and Guy Debord and Karl Marx, and I can transfer my knowledge into fashion, like that is my edge. And I see people respond to this very strongly every time I
Yeah.
read a nonfiction book and I post something on my Instagram. People react really strongly. There is this craving for knowledge out there from people who either A, don't know where to start, uh, or B, don't know where to start.
Right.
And so after a while, I even like on my personal website, eugenerabkin.com, after a while, I made a reading list because people keep asking me, like, where did you get all this information? And so, yeah.
Well, we'll see it. By the way, Sadface shouted out. So those who are not listening, watching this live, we're recording live on Substack, and so we've got people in the audience. Sadface just sent a shout out to the many classic Russian literature books on the shelves behind you, Eugene. So there.
Thank you. Yes.
The one. w- Oh man, I had a really good question. Now I can't remember what it is, Eugene. This is.
It's the Russian classics. It's they will ruin your life. Trust me.
Oh, no, you know what I wanted to say actually was that apropos of this predictions piece, because then I want to talk about the Gen Zero article that you just cited a second ago. But one thing that I was struck by reading the predictions piece that Alex Danco wrote that we started out was that in it, if you read in it what his optimism comes from the notion that these prediction markets or this prediction as a successor to postmodernism will allow us to essentially project and then realize the future that we want. And as I was reading it, it reminded me a lot of reading um uh Michael Lewis's first book, Liar's Poker, which is about um I think it's Bear Stearns. Is it Bear Stearns where he worked
Yeah.
originally? But the guys who came up with essentially um, option trade, was it option trading? Anyway, they created essentially an entirely new market because they were just like, oh, we can make a market here
Yeah.
and create incredible value. And that was what drove a lot of the financial boom of the 1980s and led us eventually to the 2008 financial collapse. Reading Alex's piece, I was just like, oh, this is just guys who go, we can make a thing up and make it valuable. Let's make it up. That's what the whole world is now, making a thing up. And it's weird because it gets to this like almost mystical sort of conception of how things come to life in the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's how cryptocurrency works, right? Like,
Yeah. Yes, for sure.
why cryptocurrency? Because a bunch of people decided that this is going to be a store of value, and it is. And look at us, reasonable people. I don't know when you read your first article about Bitcoin. I read my first article about Bitcoin in New Yorker when Bitcoin was $1. And I was like, well, this makes no sense.
Yeah.
And now once a week, I'm like, yeah, if I invested $1,000 back,
If or never mind that, if you'd put in $50, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
just
yeah.
literal pizza money. Is there anything like that you see in any of these spheres around us that feels like it has the potential to be transformative that isn't AI?
That isn't AI. Can't think of anything off the top of my head, to be honest. But sure, it comes out. One of the things I also think about is how, and that's another article that I sent you back. I said, oh, it'd be interesting, is how phenomenal we are at marketing.
Mm-hmm.
We're not very good at many things in America, but at marketing, we are incredible. And I was just thinking how we market these technologies as these incredible breakthroughs, universe changing. And I keep going back and thinking, how did people think when telegraph happened? instead of sending a letter that would arrive in a month, right? You you got it in 20,
Minutes. Yeah,
right? Uh, First flight, commercial flight. We didn't have to take a boat for a week, but you could just, telephone must have been mind blowing for people,
sure.
right? And I'm not saying these things will not happen, and I'm not saying we're not living through life changing technologies. We certainly are, but we are also very good at marketing things that are not, i.e., metaverse, NFTs, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was invited to go as a guest of Adobe to their big Adobe Max thing next week in LA, which is the showcase of a whole series of new features and stuff that's happening. So I'm really intrigued to see that. But it is going to be very interesting to understand where this vanguard of the creative world, right? The Adobe, the legacy provider of creative, the software that powers creative expression, how they position what they're doing now at this moment where the creative world is both simultaneously exploding and collapsing with slop and, you know, non-human creativity. Um,
I think
I
there
don't,
will be flight to quality. I think it's
I, I,
inevitable.
I think I agree with you. I don't think there's any other imagination or there's any other way to imagine it. Um, I also think it's what's interesting. I have been this week, and I've got to try to compose my thoughts in the next couple of hours to put out with the newsletter today. But I've been thinking a lot today about, or this week about William Gibson's pattern recognition.
Mm.
Are you familiar? Have you read it?
Mhm.
Yeah. So, it's a book that's famous because Case Pollard, the lead character, is allergic to bad brands, and which is a really funny idea, right? Like literally, you have a visceral react. You see you're presented with a bad brand, and you have a visceral reaction. You break out in a
Guilt is
sweater.
charged.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine what the world would look like if anybody actually had that real, physiological reaction? But in any case, one of the subplots of that book is the idea of the footage, right? Which is this um, unexplained serial content found digitally but obscured through a bunch of non-public web pages and this sort of stuff. And Case is searching for it and trying to find meaning for it. And it's been too long since I read the book for me to really remember how that resolves. But the reason I have been thinking about it is that there's been a lot of discussion about how the non-scale expressions of creativity, the human, the typo-ridden, the exclusive and the closed off, is actually now a signature of life and value. And I think it gets back a little bit to what you said earlier about the idea of the high modernism making things new and making things challenging. Was it challenging? You said difficult, right? Like we are instinctively putting a little bit of difficulty, shoving difficulty back into the system, or looking for friction, because if we don't have that, then it doesn't feel things don't feel real.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Then it's just junk food and just people trying to take your money. I always say, like, what's the difference between art and kitsch? Like, kitsch doesn't want anything but your money. Kitsch doesn't care about anything but your money. So when we talk about and I think one of the things I would point out here about what you said is, yes, there is this desire because we live in such overwhelming world of optimism. We live in the 1% culture, what I call. We've been talking about 1% economy. We're in the 1% culture.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
0.1%, right? There's more culture than ever. There's more fashion than ever. What does an average person hear about? This tiny sliver. It's
Yeah.
always the same people, always endorsing the same things. It's And of course, people are tired of it, and of course, people are sick of it. The issue is they have hogged the spotlight to such a degree is that I think for a lot of people, it's hard to even know where to start looking for alternatives. And
Yeah.
that's why my argument over the past year has been it is time to create alternative networks. And I usually talk about it when I talk about fashion, but I think it should be everywhere, right? It's
Yeah.
creating alternative networks. And in fashion, I argue, it's independent brands, independent shops, independent media. And we all need to understand that we are in the same boat and we all need to support each other. Uh, Streetwear did it, right?
Yep.
There's your blueprint. It can be done again. And so that's where my brain is at now. But I think it can be with everything, right? It can be with music. It can be with film. I mean, look at what A24 is doing, right? It's already become a bit of a cliche, right? There's now neon, etc. But it's like, okay, there is something going on. And I think these resurgences will happen because
Yeah.
we're human. There will be people who just cannot take this slop that we.
Well, I mean, I think we have in the last 2 decades have been introduced to and indoctrinated to the notion of being too big to fail as the ideal. And I think what we're now butting up against is the idea that things, if they are big for big sake, have gotten there by failing to a certain degree. Like they've gotten there by you know regressing to a mean. And I wonder, it's funny you should bring up A24, which is a let's call it cinematic universe that I really love and admire. But I also, having seen the challenges that they had with, for instance, the Big Rock movie, which performed really poorly, we went and saw If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You over the weekend. Really well done film. Nobody in the theater.
Hmm.
It sort of it makes you wonder, like, o- to where does the overreach start to happen, and do we as a culture collectively start to go, actually things don't we things shouldn't be big, they should be the
Yeah.
correct size,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
we're okay with things being the correct size as opposed to
Exactly.
being big for big sake.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think I would say that at the base of it there are two things. The complete victory of neoliberalist mentality,
Hmm.
and also uh, the idea that when you and I were growing up, right, selling out was a sin, right?
Hmm.
And now because the neoliberal mentality has com- complete victory, in my opinion,
Yeah.
complete cultural victory. Uh, there is no such thing as selling out. There's just selling. Right?
Yeah.
Like you talk to kids about selling out, and they're like, "What? Like we want to be rich, and we want to be rich quick because that is cool." This
Right.
intro- this culture of I just read the advanced copy of W. David Marx's new book, Blank Space, and he talks about this.
David, if you're watching, why don't I have an advance? Lauren Sherman has an advance. Eugene Rabkin has an advance. Why doesn't Ben have an advance?
Oh,
Come on, David.
that's
Come on,
crazy.
David.
I'll give you mine. Yeah, if
Okay.
anyone should have an advanced copy, it should be you. And yeah, he talks about this cult of entrepreneurial heroism, and that is absolutely true, right? This sort
Sure.
of people, dear watchers, you need to understand that historically, nobody liked business people. This is a new phenomenon. This is a very, very new phenomenon. And I think maybe we need to get away from that. And I think
Yeah.
you're right. Yeah, and that's why like things should be the right size. Exactly. This is what when I talk about fashion, I'm like, why do we have an ideal that making it is being a multimillionaire and like being chauffeured everywhere in the Black Mercedes? Why can't you just have a brand, make a good living, and be happy with what you do?
Yeah. Well, or I think that to my mind, there is nothing wrong with the black limousine and the big brand and everything. it gets problematic when you shorten the vector of time to now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it build over time by all means. And I think that there you can do that gracefully and sustainably. Demand it now and you become necessarily vulgar and,
Yeah.
greedy essentially. Hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of time frames, Eugene, we've come to the end of the hour. So I'm going to let you go, but I will say we have now established a reason to get back together in 12 months to see whether Demna has succeeded or failed, or where he is along that continuum at the time. We're going to start a Kalshi market. I'm actually going to do this because I'm
Let's do it.
interested to see how that all works. So those listening, if you want to get in, look on Kalshi for Will Demna Succeed at Gucci. Give me a day or two to set it up because I don't know how complicated it is, but I'm going to do that after this. And then, Eugene, where can people find you otherwise to dig into the world of
Yeah.
wardrobe?
I because I try to keep my social media engagement also to a minimum, the best way to find me is on Instagram. And my personal is Eugene Rabkin, just my name. And then there's, of course, Style Zeitgeist is the magazine, Instagram. But I'm most active on Instagram under Eugene Rabkin. And then if you just Google that name, a lot of stuff will come up, including my personal website and so on. I will announce my book at some point. This was a preview, but like I'll announce the name, and I am happy to report a lot of incredible people signed up to support it. Like, it's going to be, I am flattered that some really amazing people who I cannot reveal yet
Of course.
are behind my vision. And yeah, hopefully we can reconvene when the book is out and we can talk about it.
We definitely can. And who knows, maybe we
And
can
I'm
even.
sure make sure you get an event stuff.
Yeah. Listen, come on, guys. All I want. All right. Well, listen, everybody, this has been Sick Talks number 108 with Eugene Rabkin of Style Zeitgeist and many other interests and loci. So track Eugene down for sure. One of the best and most fascinating thinkers out there as far as I'm concerned. And a great friend. So Eugene, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank
And
you,
we're
Ben.
looking forward
Always
to
a
talking
pleasure.
further.
Always a
Indeed.
pleasure.
All right, y'all. Speak soon.
Bye.
Bye.